objectives for today: to identify key approaches to planning and preparing to outsource to improve relationships, identify key components for formal study, vendor performance management, identify adequate oversight, standard operating procedure, and other practices for the sponsor. Again, something we need to implement early and often is those oversight measures. So the first thing we need to do is clearly define what will those measures be? How will we implement them? What are we looking for? So it's kind of going back to the very basic questions: who, how, what. And we can certainly do where and when as well. And finally, we'll talk about end-of-project analysis to pave the way for improvement in future relationships. Because in our ideal situation, we find a good partner and we grow that relationship. We can expect to have some challenges along the way initially, but then we'd like to continue with that same partner on additional projects because we'd like to reduce that learning curve. So it is important that at the end of each project, we look at what went well, certainly, but what can we do to improve on both sides for next time? So let's talk about vendor introductions. We've set the framework for the different categories that vendor management covers. Contract research organization is what a CRO is. And oftentimes we think of CRO as only the group that manages data, the group that only goes out and does the monitoring. But truly, they are a person or an organization, commercial, academic, or other, contracted by the sponsor to perform one or more of the sponsor's trial-related duties and functions. A sponsor may transfer any or all the sponsor's trial-related duties and functions to a CRO, but the ultimate responsibility for the quality and integrity of the trial data always resides with the sponsor. The CRO should implement quality assurance and quality control. And I think this last point is interesting. Again, it's something we take for granted, but very recently I've been contracted by a CRO to help them develop their standard operating procedures and work in a quality assurance capacity. And the CRO has been in operation for a number of years. I believe they've been in business now for about 15 years in a niche arena. And they offer everything from assistance with protocol development, case report form development, source documents, monitoring. But what they don't guarantee is that they will have any auditing done on any of their trials. They don't have an internal quality assurance team. They have an independent auditor who they will hire when the sponsor insists. But they don't automatically implement any form of quality assurance. They don't guarantee a certain percentage of trials will be reviewed in any study. So to me, again, that doesn't really meet the expectation here in ICH GCP. CRO should implement quality assurance and quality control. Quality control we can think of as the daily measure, certainly the monitoring, the report review, the general oversight, the metrics tracking, the things that are done daily. And most CROs are very, very good at that piece. But what they don't always have, again, is that quality assurance, the independent review of systems and processes to ensure everybody's doing it the same way, essentially. And the other element of ICH GCP related to CROs is that any trial-related duty and function that is transferred to and assumed by a CRO should be specified in writing. And certainly, again, that's something we generally put into our contracts. But one of the things that's already come up is how do we make sure they do things the way we want them to do them? Well, that is something we can include in that TORA, in that delegation of responsibilities or transfer of regulatory obligations, to use the full phrase for TORA, that transfer of regulatory obligations. We can include elements in there that we want specifically adhered to, which set of SOPs we will be following, what are the expectations for timelines, not just that we're transferring monitoring, but what does that encompass? Not just that we're transferring project management, but what does that entail? Does that include having recruitment conversations with sites, for example? So being more specific in writing. And any trial-related duties and functions not specifically transferred to and assumed by a CRO are retained by the sponsor. So again, one of our pitfalls is not really spelling out in detail what do we mean by bucket tasks. So one example that I ran into between a CRO and a sponsor was that the CRO had been delegated the monitoring, the project management, the general oversight of the trial. But the sponsor retained the safety piece. The medical monitor was a direct consultant with the sponsor. And what ended up happening when we did the final audit of the trial master file being maintained by the CRO, they did not maintain correspondence from the medical monitor to sites. And again, the question is, well, that was correspondence. That should have been in there. But it hadn't formally been delegated in writing for that safety piece because, again, the sponsor was retaining all safety information. SAE reports were to go directly to the sponsor. The medical monitor worked for the sponsor. So it seems like a very, very minor oversight, but what it cost us in terms of time and resources was having to go back to all of those sites, have them print out any correspondence, any questions to the medical monitor, asking the medical monitor to go through and provide copies of everything that had occurred, and then backfilling that trial master file. Because the sponsor certainly hadn't retained it with the assumption that the TMF had been delegated to the CRO. And again, it may have been a logic fault on either party, but it wasn't specific in writing to go back to, and it wasn't covered until the end